Let me now introduce to you our guest speaker, Greg Williams, Editor-in-Chief of Wired Magazine, who will share his insights on finding opportunity in accelerating change. Greg is an authority on technology trends and the ways they impact business and society. As Editor-in-Chief of Wired Magazine, Greg meets the innovators, thinkers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and creatives who are changing the world and writes on a variety of subjects, including innovation, technology, business, creativity, and ideas. I'll hand it over to you, Greg.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that kind introduction. Really appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to hearing your thoughts after this session. So as Steve said, I'm Greg Williams from Wired. And in case you're not familiar with what we do, Wired is a title that offers readers a view of what's coming next. So the trends, the ideas, the businesses, the technologies that are really impacting the world. And I'm very fortunate in that I get to spend my days talking to people who are really trying to think about what's coming next. So I'm talking to entrepreneurs, investors, business leaders, technologists, designers, governmental agencies that are really engaged with shaping the future. And until sort of earlier this year, really the way that most organizations were planning for the future was to think incrementally, like in terms of like a linear progress, right? Progress could be planned, it could be projected using the models of the past. Clearly, COVID-19 has upended many of these assumptions and expectations about the way that we grow and we manage our businesses. But there are also many things that really have not changed, including many of the emerging technologies that we are going to be building the companies of the future on. For instance, one of the biggest trends that I really would like you to sort of like think about is the fact that, you know, none of the technologies that we are thinking about really having impact in the world in the future is happening in a vacuum. The world is interdisciplinary now. So what we're seeing is that COVID-19 has shown us that these complex ecosystems are highly interdependent. So we have technologies like machine learning, computational biology, 3D printing, robotics, material science, and other accelerating technologies are still coming together in new consumer and industrial applications. And that matters because whether you're in retail or shipping or transportation or pharma or consultancy, these really are still the forces that are going to be shaping our organizations and shaping the products and services of the future. So there's still enormous opportunity if we look at these kinds of emerging technologies. Another thing that hasn't changed, I really believe this strongly, is that how we fare in this rapidly evolving ecosystem is not going to be determined by technology, but by human ingenuity, right? How we collaborate, how creative we are in challenging our assumptions about business as usual, and ultimately how we embrace change. So thinking about disruption, I think, you know, COVID clearly is a really powerful expression of this. But I think to some degree, what we're seeing is just this acceleration of trends. So the entrepreneur and investor Mark Andrewsson has a saying that software's eaten the world, and I think, or is eating, I should say, the world. And I think he's absolutely right, right? The world is taking on this digital layer. No industry, no business is immune. We now have, you know, internet connected monitors for smart metering, automation in a vast array of industries, from healthcare to telecos, black box trading in finance, robotics in manufacturing, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, machine learning, and machine-to-machine systems that communicate over the internet with each other directly without any mediation from human beings. And what that obviously means is that all our businesses are transforming, because this isn't something that's coming down the realm, you know, down the line in some kind of distant realm of the future. It's happening around us, and it's something that we are able to participate in and really think about in terms of the way that we can have impact on our businesses. Try and move that slide. Here we go. Today, the challenge is that many of us work in organizations in which they have a particular mindset. So you might think, oh, well, I work in retail, or I work in healthcare, or I work in security or finance or insurance, but actually you actually work for a tech company, right? Every single company today is a tech company. we think about companies like Ford or BMW or Toyota in the era of Tesla, or the Chinese company BYD. What's, HSBC or QNB or NCB in the age of Monzo, or MoneySmart, Meme, or Revolut? What's Safeway or Almira in the age of Amazon? So we're all working for tech companies, and whether that's to optimize our performance, to automate our business process, to reach new customers, or to deliver our products and services. And that means, for me, that means there's no going back, right? Many of our customers have moved on. Many of our business models have been significantly changed, and there's no way we're going back. And I think that COVID obviously has accelerated all this. And I think we can say that it's the same also in some ways for governments, for nation states, and increasingly large companies are playing a role in this. So I want to sort of step back and maybe look at something for a moment. I apologize, I thought this slide was slightly higher quality. It's what you can see here is something that really sort of changes the very notion of what a nation state is. So this is an identity card, an e-citizen card for Estonia. And what Estonia is offering is anyone in the world the opportunity to become an e-citizen of that country. So you hand over 50 euros, a photograph, your fingerprints are taken, and your identity can be verified. And you're issued with this thing, this identity card, and it has a cryptographic key and a PIN, and it gives access to all of Estonia's national systems. It's an attempt to reinvent public services for the internet age, and also fundamentally redefine what it means to be a country. So obviously in 1991, Estonia gained independence from the Soviet Union, and it really reinvented itself. It had a massive investment in public infrastructure and high-speed fiber optic cable and digital services. So today, 94% of the country's tax returns are made online. I think it takes around an average of 5 minutes for citizens to make that tax return, and the tax authorities and banks are all synced up, so tax offices and local banks can ensure that payments are made sort of very smoothly. So the state is becoming digital. Now, every task can be done digitally, is being done that way. India is another good example of this. So earlier this year, obviously millions of migrant workers were forced to move from cities because of the COVID lockdown, return to their villages in the countryside. And this is obviously a hugely traumatic thing for many people. But Aadhaar, the country's pioneering biometric ID system, came to the rescue. The government was able to transfer 1.5 billion US digitally into the bank accounts of around 30 million people. Very little waste, very little fraud, almost no distribution costs, so that farmers in rural areas would have an income. Now, Aadhaar has around 1 billion accounts, and 1 billion people are linked to the system now. And so that meant the state was able to channel help to where it was most needed. Contrast that with what happened in the United States, where 90 million paper checks were laboriously sent through the mail, accompanied by a letter from President Trump. Now, if we project this forward, we think about things like COVID vaccination. 1.3 billion people are currently registered in Aadhaar. That means that the system is going to be crucial to authenticating digital certificates as part of our vaccination efforts moving forward. And scaling this is going to be super important. So IIT in Bangalore is working on an open source foundational ID platform that could be taken up by any country free of charge. It's called MOSIP, M-O-S-I-P, which stands for Modular Open Source Identity Platform. Morocco, the Philippines are both implementing national ID schemes based on MOSIP. They're going to be rolled out early next year. Other countries, Ethiopia, Guinea, Sri Lanka, are working on pilots as well. Ivory Coast, Togo, and Tunisia have also expressed an interest. And there are plans for countries across West Africa to have a shared, interoperable ID platform allowing cross-border authentication. So well-designed digital ID systems are going to play a vital role in building trust in both government to citizen and citizen to citizen transactions, right? Each of which are crucial drivers of social capital. And we can see how this might play out when we look at Estonia. say you want to open a business in Tallinn, right? So if you have your identity card, you can go online from wherever you are in the world, log on to the government portal with your card and PIN, and use it to form your Estonian company, then register with an Estonian bank and start trading. And because the Estonian tax office is digitally linked to Estonian banks, filing your taxes is relatively simple. So that's the opportunity. And I think that that's a super interesting way to look at it. You could be a German or a French or an Ethiopian citizen, and you could run your digital services through another state. It's like the state almost as a cloud kind of environment. And what's interesting is I think we're now seeing states competing with their neighbors on the kind of quality of their digital services, their user interface. So just as you know, you might switch your bank because one of the challenger banks has got a much better app with phone, which you find you know, the user experience might much better. Estonia's hoping that then you will start running your company through their country because its infrastructure is so good to use. Obviously, you know, we have to look at issues like personal data, but I think that we're seeing something quite interesting now with some of these initiatives. Singapore, I think, is super interesting as well. It has a digital first approach to public services, but also crucially, the fact that it can gain competitive advantage by having world-class digital services means that it also can build this business hub in Asia. So according to Cisco's annual Digital Readiness Index, Singapore ranks as the world's most well-prepared country for digitization. So the measures they're using are readiness based on ease of doing business, human capital, startup environment, technology adoption, and technology infrastructure. So the Singapore government is now developing further e-government services for citizens and businesses alike. It's strengthening its digital policy, its regulations, its technology adoption support for business and society as a whole. It's enhancing its digital platforms for sharing data, for collaboration, for innovation. It's also building in resilience. Obviously, it needs resilience, it needs reliability, it needs security. Those things are important. But also thinking about cross-border capabilities and encouraging entrepreneurship in that way. So it views technology as a way not just of delivering services more efficiently, but for providing the basis for a globally relevant economy. So obviously states can act in a sovereign way in order to transform their countries, but it's clear that digital services operate beyond borders, right? We don't just think about digital services operating within sovereign states. And what's interesting, I think, in the last few years is that we've seen, you know, maybe a challenge to this idea of the open internet. So obviously we've seen a fracturing in the US and the China relationship. There has been a rise of populism in Europe. Under President Trump, there was kind of an isolationist aspect to the United States, which will probably change under President-elect Biden. India, there's been a rise, obviously, in sort of like nationalist sort of like policies. And Russia's talked about decoupling itself from the global network. So it's arguable that geography is now more important than when Thomas Friedman first wrote "The world is flat." So we think of the world, you know, the internet as this monolith, but actually it's a really complex, it's a tangle of systems, of protocols, of standards, of hardware and organizations. And at the moment, there are 4 internets really with the kind of the requisite ethical vision, technological realization, and sufficiently powerful institutional support. So this is according to 2 academics, Wendy Hall and Kieran O'Hara. So they describe 4 very different internets. So the open sort of internet of Silicon Valley, which is, I guess, the kind of like the original founding principle of, you know, open access for everyone. No one controls the internet, which obviously is maybe being challenged by the rise of sort of so many large, powerful technology companies. But the core of it is this free flow of data as an engineering process, engineering dream, and also as a philosophical idea. We've got a kind of a Brussels version as well, which also sort of cherishes this freedom, but it also enshrines it in a framework of kind of citizens' rights and good faith, and it's really based on privacy and the rights of users. There's a kind of version in DC, I guess, a more kind of commercial version that promotes data holders' property rights and the coordination of free markets. And then I think you've got one which you could describe as like the paternal internet in Beijing, the Chinese internet. So incredible innovation happening there, but also the internet as a way of implementing social ideals. It means not only of security and censorship, but also crowdsourcing ideas around social credit and gathering very effective data around applications such as artificial intelligence. And I think this relates to the next big geopolitical trend. So issues such as fake news, privacy, antitrust, AI ethics mean that big tech is being reined in a bit by Brussels and Washington. We can see the news today from Brussels, and I think we'll see something similar in Washington. Well, we are seeing it certainly around sort of some of the big platforms. California and other states have introduced regulation similar to GDPR in Europe, which errs on the side of consumers. And we're going to see more of this, I think, in the coming years with a push from policymakers throughout the world to ensure that what many perceive have become monopolies are broken up and there's a level playing field. We're seeing this play out with Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram at the moment. Security is a big part of this. We've heard the big story this year about Huawei and whether it's implemented in networks and 5G networks throughout the world. Some governments are removing it from core infrastructure, which offers a really interesting kind of dilemma. Do you slow down the rollout of 5G because you're worried about Huawei and the potential security implications? Or do you think, well, actually we can mitigate those potential security implications? What's more important is we drive the economy and we make sure that 5G is rolled out throughout our territory. The other thing to think about in this context, I think, is cryptocurrency. So we look at something like Libra, which it could become a meaningful cryptocurrency networks. So we'll need this kind of cross-border governance, as this is the only way of effectively creating the standards necessary for trust to occur. So that's sort of some of the big picture stuff. And I'd like to maybe move on to sort of like look at maybe what's happened in the last year or so in terms of innovation. So I think there's three ways in which COVID has impacted organizations. So firstly, I think that we had a period of forced adoption, right? We had no choice but to run every aspect of our businesses via digital. The organizations often talk about digital transformation journeys, processes that often take years to achieve. We had to do it in like 2 or 3 weeks, maybe less in some instances. So I think what's interesting is that we had to act, right? This was forced adoption. And obviously this provoked, as I said earlier on, enormous acceleration in many of the trends that were already occurring, whether that's the growth in online retail or a decline in demand for crude oil, adoption of cloud services by enterprises, or a switch to contactless payments. And I think this is, all obviously allied to our having the technological capacity through mobile and collaborative cloud-based software tools. The third catalyst I'm calling innovation by necessity. So I'd really be interested to know how many of you out there have actually tried experimenting with new products, new services, or new ways of doing businesses with customers or vendors or internally during this period. And I will bet it's the majority of you. Most businesses are now having to try or are open to trying things they would not have tried before. And COVID offers organizations this opportunity for these big strategic moves. Research shows that companies that pursue these big strategic moves persistently through every phase of the economic cycle, even the challenging one that we're experiencing at the moment, increase the odds of outperforming their peers. So COVID has meant that much of the kind of, the organizational inertia that usually stands in the way of unlocking these big moves is now gone. So, there are all kinds of reasons why we maybe want to think about doing things in new ways. This almost goes back to the beginning of my talk, which in so many ways is industries and companies that were undergoing a digital transformation suddenly have all found themselves now digital by default. You look at Vodafone having to double its broadband and its fixed and its mobile capacity over a weekend. Netflix having to ensure that it's able to sort of service most of the world. Every large organization had to act. And I think what's interesting is that, you look at, pretty much all over the world, this bottom area of the slide, I think, is important. It's the systemic importance to functioning of modern life. So Do in the UAE has doubled bandwidth for distance learning initiatives at no additional cost, right? So it's utilizing available bandwidth. MTN in South Africa has announced an increase in infrastructure to accommodate the high volumes of network traffic as more and more South Africans work from home. Saudi telecom company STC reported 1,000% increase in remote education bandwidth and have secured additional network infrastructure. So this is so important. These large organizations acting in ways that are really impactful for all of us. How did this come about? Well, I've spent the past few months talking to people in every kind of organizations, people in telcos that had to double their capacity, as I've said. One executive at a startup that works in the energy sector that had, over a weekend with a remote workforce, had to set up a customer service line for vulnerable customers literally overnight to help people with their customer service needs. Venture capitalists I've talked to who are now hiring senior positions for their portfolio companies from other parts of the world, places they would not have looked for talent before, but are now making hires online virtually because they realize there's a real opportunity now to hire people that they maybe would not have considered because of geographical proximity or distance. We're seeing medicine go online for the first time ever. The majority now of consultations in various territories across the world are happening online. Legal services, who would have thought it? They've talked about it for many years. Legal services are finally going digital first. I talked to an executive, a UK bank with 1.5 million customers. They moved thousands of customer service agents to working from home in 2 weeks. So I think this can all be summed up in this great quote from someone I talked to, a very senior executive. The pandemic has reset everybody's view of the art of the possible. And I think that is such an important message, and hopefully one we can hang on to after we're through this. The question is clearly, what will change in the long run? Are we looking at fundamental, structural, systemic changes to the way that we live, work, do business, or is this more cyclical? Will things creep back to the way they were? I think when you look at technology, clearly these are structural shifts. If you look at what's happening in retail, that is a structural shift. Where are we now? So I think there's 6 real kind of clear kind of areas that we can kind of identify. So firstly, as I said, the pandemic has catalyzed changes that were already on their way. I think the metrics of the past have gone. There is a zero basing going on in every CFO's office. All fixed costs are under review, whether that's travel needs, client relationship management, through to commercial property portfolios held by larger firms. And I think that we're seeing a sense in which resilience trumps efficiency. And obviously that comes with enormous possibilities. I think the new terrain is about adapting fast to brittleness and adjusting to a non-linear and sometimes incomprehensible world, certainly a very complex world. I think we're looking at resilience now as a really powerful metric, even at the cost of short-term profits. I think we're looking at people being put first, humanizing business. I think this is, we've had this, it's been rhetorical, I think, in business for many years, but I think now many large organizations are really thinking about the changing the sort of social contract they have with their people. And I think finally, we're seeing a great reorganization. What next, as I said earlier on, what happens next when we go from choosing to digitize our organizations to having to? What will be the new companies that come out of this? We're seeing sort of some really interesting growth in areas, like online, commerce is growing very, very, very rapidly. Travel obviously is very challenged, but we're seeing some really interesting trends around localism that I'll touch on shortly. So I talked at the beginning of the presentation about this complex ecosystem we're all in, and I think that all those trends I've mentioned are interconnected. And I think that we're also seeing, you know, the tech trends that are really, and they're kind of like the big sort of structural shifts that are going on. So the hollowing out of, as I said, of cities, this new localism, a move from in-person work to remote working, probably moving on to hybrid working fairly soon. We're seeing an enormous shift, and I think it's gathering pace from this carbon-based economy to one based on electricity. Geopolitical trends that are driving us towards a more fragmented world when it comes to standards and governance of the internet, although that could shift. This is moving fast. A willingness in some countries maybe to swap privacy for more surveillance, if that keeps them safe, if that keeps them secure. A rise of new interfaces, a rise in automation in both manufacturing and service-based organizations. And I think the latter is super interesting. And in the time I have left, I'd like to touch on some of these trends. So Chris Andrewsson, former editor of Wired in the US, he said a few years ago that if the first 10 years of the web was about finding new social and innovation models online, the next 10 were about applying these to the new, to the real world. And I think that this is, you know, the period that we're in right now, right? So the relationship between bits and atoms is getting very, very complicated, and it's moving very, very quickly. But it's only going to move faster, right? Things are not going to ever be this slow again. We're only going to speed up the way that we transition to a digital future. In the coming years, we're going to attach sensors to pretty much every object in our built environments, and the data they're going to generate is going to be hard for us to process. So we're going to have to automate a lot more of our decision making. So I think that we're going to see, you know, a big trend, a big trend to an era where the distinction between the physical and the digital world is becoming less and less important. And we see this happening in all kinds of areas. So whether that's industrial digitization, smart cities, mobility, very important one, or autonomous systems. And I think that what this means is that there are all kinds of interesting opportunities for us to maybe connect the dots in our organizations as never before. So I'll turn that volume down on that. So hopefully, I'm not entirely sure how to do that. So robotics, we now have autonomous robots that can do repetitive tasks, but increasingly there are going to be robots that we can deploy in new ways, like this one from Boston Dynamics, which was just purchased the other day. I think we'll see a big shift moving from industrial uses to uses in areas like healthcare, and we're going to be seeing less anthropomorphic versions. I mean, this is very interesting to look at, but I don't think it represents the kind of machines that we're going to be seeing in the future. We're already seeing these kinds of units with LiDAR on there. There's very, very interesting ways that we can navigate spaces and look at geography with these kinds of machines. They also work in bad weather, so there are multiple use cases. Clearly, you know, pick and pack robots have a great use in areas such as logistics. But we're going to see this moving into really interesting areas. There's one founder of IQ Robotics, who was behind Dubai's first robotic fulfillment center, says intelligent fulfillment is going to become the industry norm in the coming years. And I think that what this means is that this kind of automation ensures transparent 24/7 live inventory control while we're going to deliver, you know, parcel, well, whatever needs to be delivered more accurately and at 70% less cost. So a big transition. That's one kind of robotics. I think we're going to start seeing other forms of robotics, though, in the coming years. This is a company called Starship, super interesting. They do delivery robots. And obviously COVID has increased the consumer appetite for deliveries. And we're seeing this all over the world. JD.com is using them in China. Starship, the company here you're seeing, was delivering food during the pandemic in Qatar. Ocado has just taken a minority stake in a company called Mimex, which is a a robotics startup specializing in home deliveries that's targeting customers in the Middle East. So there's a clear use case for this. This can become part of a customer journey. But if we want these bots to be useful, they have to be able to interact with human beings. And we also have to make our world machine readable, right? These machines have to be able to understand the environments they're operating in. They're operating within, because clearly that's where the value lies. So we need to continue to map our world, right, to develop technologies, for instance, largely imaging technologies that will allow machines to interact with us in the way that we would like to. Here's an interesting example. So this is a Walmart store. Walmart have been trialing robots like this in store. They move around, they scan shelves, they look at pricing, they look at goods that are out of stock. And what's interesting here is that, so when they first introduced them, it was really intriguing because researchers went in and they watched the way that human beings interacted with these machines. And initially, human beings were taking photos, they were uploading videos to YouTube of these robots. The researchers went back 18 months later, and intriguingly, the human beings had stopped looking at the robots. The robots were going about their business, and the human beings had ignored them, and were ignoring them, excuse me. And I think this is really interesting. I think automation is most powerful when we don't even know it's there. Technology becomes truly transformational when it's seamlessly woven into our lives, when we don't notice it any longer. And I think we're entering clearly this age of the autonomy economy, where machines will go about their tasks with minimal oversight from human beings. And we're moving away increasingly. So we think about software as a service. Increasingly, I think we're going to start seeing robotics as a service, whether that's in areas like retail, or whether it's in more software-related back office environments. But robotics as a service, I think, is going to be a super interesting trend in the coming years. Clearly, automation and job displacement will be a significant challenge for the global economy. It already is because of COVID. 2017 McKinsey report estimated 375 million workers, 14% of the global workforce, are going to need to switch occupations by 2030. So this is an enormous shift. And in one of the most cited papers, Carl Frey from Oxford talked about estimated 47% of US employment could be at risk. However, there is also a lot of data out there that shows that automation will displace jobs, but it will also create many more. So the World Economic Forum suggests that automation is going to, probably displace around 75 million jobs globally, but it'll create 133 million. So governance is going to be really important, so that we ensure that workers have lifelong learning. Rather than upskilling people, we might have to think about reskilling them in different ways, in different kinds of industries. So this is clearly something that we're going to see accelerated because of COVID. So I think we're going to start seeing the world in new ways as well. So this is a drone. We're seeing use of drones and satellites in all kinds of areas. They used to be just for the military. Now they're being used in agriculture, city planning, management. This is in disaster relief. This is in Kathmandu a few years ago after the earthquake. And I think that things are moving very, very quickly in this area. So last year, UPS announced that it had received certification from the Federal Aviation Authority in the US to deliver medical packages to college campuses. So we need to start thinking about how we change the metaphor around this, right? So maybe instead of just seeing them as flying objects, we think of them as servers, right? Just sucking up all this data that we can understand. And I think that we're going to have very soon satellites and drones pretty much giving us real-time data of every kind of inch of the world's surface. Obviously, we're going to need machine learning and AI to process this, but it will enable us to comprehend geo-economic trends across the world. That could be deforestation. It could be the amount of trucks on a particular stretch of road, the number of pedestrians entering a shopping mall. Members of the Gulf Cooperation Council are stepping up their use AI tools to halt the spread of coronavirus, using technology such as drones to ensure social distancing and that people are limiting their movements. And we're going to see other learnings. So we can have a better understanding of customer behavior, the influence of location on sales, traffic patterns within cities and regions, disruption of supply chains, which we saw at the beginning of the pandemic. But most importantly, I think we're going to see this data helping us with predictive trends. So satellite companies now offer clients in financial services predictive data about the quarterly performance of big box retailers based solely on satellite images from parking lots, the type of car, how many passengers, their ages, what time of day they came, how many people in the group. There's an Israeli startup called Winwood that can anticipate the movement of commodities around the world, looking at satellite images and mapping that with data around cargo vessels that are sailing around the world. So they can see movements of oil, movements of wheat, and are able then to offer that kind of data to their clients. Huge opportunity here, obviously, for retailers, for logistics organizations, and also for us to understand our built environments and the natural environment, crucially. So what's happening around, around this bigger picture is that pretty much every large, organization throughout the world is having to rethink its business model. So a great example of this is the automotive industry. So I'm going to talk about BMW a little bit, but you could say that, this applies to pretty much every automotive company in the world, because automotive companies are rethinking themselves as mobility platforms. So BMW has rethought itself around the acronym ACES, Autonomous, Connected, Emission-Free and Shared. And they're thinking about subscription models for cars. So, and I know other companies are too, for many other, where you basically, you have a subscription and you have access to vehicles, either you can drive them or a person can drive them, or they're autonomous maybe in the future. And they think about this as a mobility service. Also, the kinds of services that car companies are able to provide will change. So can you partner with payments companies so that there is a very seamless transfer of funds, maybe either when your vehicle is being charged or when you're filling it up with gas? Could you maybe, if someone calls an autonomous car, could you maybe have it call at the supermarket on its way to pick that person up on their way home to stock up with groceries for the meal that night? So there's all kinds of ways in which automotive companies are now thinking of themselves as a platform business upon which other organizations can build their services as well. There's so much talk, obviously, about interfaces. We talk about AR and VR are these big, trends that might impact many businesses. We've not yet seen a successful application of VR and AR yet. That could change. There's products coming. Apple has an AR product next year. But I think that what we are seeing, though, without a doubt, is a switch that's akin to around 2007, 2008, maybe when you first started interacting with computation in a very different way, because you started using your fingers with your smartphone, right? Touchscreens. That was a very different thing to how we previously done it. And over the coming years, we're going to see the same, but with our ears and with our eyes, eye tracking technologies. I'm sure many of you have played with Alexa and Siri, Google Assistant. These are pieces of AI that allow us to interact with computation. And what's exciting about this is that it means we're moving away from the rigid interface of the web and the screen. You've just got to look at the massive amount of products that Amazon has launched around the Internet of Things, devices, all kinds of devices for your home, your garden, a little drone for security. And what that means is that this is moving, Amazon from being the everything store to the everywhere store, right? So it doesn't matter where you are, you can interact with Amazon. If you're in your car, if you're out running errands, if you're, going about your business in any other way. And every company is trying to build this ecosystem around our eyes and ears. So think about the growth of AirPods in the last few years, this wearable accessory market, smartwatches, but definitely this growth in headphones or earphones is going to be very, very interesting, because it allows large companies to interact with us with these competing virtual assistants that are going to be so important to them. Let's look about healthcare. We saw how fragile the healthcare environment is. This is during COVID. So this is a piece of work by a professor here in London, Shafi Ahmed. And Shafi is, a laparoscopic colorectal surgeon, and he is demonstrating here how he can use augmented reality to consult with another medical practitioner in Atlanta and a medical practitioner in Mumbai to get the best patient outcome. So they're actually looking at the scans that have been the patient has undergone, and really thinking how they can collaborate. And I think this is a really interesting look at the future of medicine. We're looking at 3 doctors in 3 different countries who are offering their diagnosis and prognosis, and well, actually, how they can kind of clinically treat a patient. So we're seeing this kind of remote surgery, this kind of remote consultation, and it means that we're able then to start treating people who maybe don't have access they maybe are in remote regions. We can use AR goggles, we can use VR technologies, and we can also train people using these technologies, which is something that Shafi is very big on. I mentioned new interfaces. There's something now being called the Internet of Eyes, and that doesn't mean human eyes. It means eyes on devices and eyes on computer vision analysis effectively. So this is very small cameras, very cheap, being attached to pretty much everything we own. Think about the Ring, think about those kind of devices that are now part of our lives. One study by a company called LDV Capital predicts that embedded cameras are going to grow around 220% over the next 5 years. And hardware manufacturers are thinking about putting these kind of cameras into pretty much everything they're creating, whether that's something in your home or it's something in your vehicle. So we're going to see a growth in this kind of technology over the coming years, and that will make machines far more intelligent and understand the environment around them. Supply chains, I think, such an important kind of part, clearly, of the global story at the moment. We saw this in the early days of the pandemic. Global competition to source PPE from China mainly. Every major manufacturer in China was switching over to manufacturing this very, very quickly. If you look at sort of like, supply of medicines around the world, very interestingly, so much paracetamol that's supplied to the Middle East and to Europe is manufactured in India, but India gets 70% of its active ingredients from China. And there was an inability to supply India. So it just shows us how the world is interconnected and complex, and to some degree fragile. But I think we're going to see a shortening of supply chains. This is to a new kind of localism. So this is a company called Infarm. It's based in Berlin, but it has sites all over the world, and they are aiming to offer fresh produce to city centres. They center their sites near city centres. This saves water, energy, transportation, offers food security, and it's far more productive, and also means less fertilizers, which is good for the environment. And crop yields are way higher than when we farm elsewhere. So interesting opportunity. We're seeing this a lot in the Middle East. Obviously, so much food importation, and I think there's a huge opportunity here for vertical farms. So we're going to see enormous amounts of this. I realize I'm kind of running short on time, so I'm just going to skip through the next few slides and then ensure that we have time for Q&A. Excuse me. So focusing on 3D printing in terms of supply chains. We're going to want to manufacture more. Clearly, 3D printing is going to be something that's important to that. We are seeing this all over the world. Fast growth area in the Middle East. Sales of 3D printing materials in the region are forecasted to exceed 550 million US by 2025. Interestingly, Qatar Airways Airbus 350 has the largest fully 3D printed part for a passenger aircraft to date. So huge growth in this. South African government also investing in this in a very significant way. This is a project from Adidas, and I think that what's interesting here is that many manufacturers are looking, rather than having these 60 to 90 days product cycles, they are looking to bring manufacturing to localized solutions. So instead of outsourcing everything maybe to Asia, Adidas is looking at local manufacturing hubs in order to fulfill its requirements for its customers, but most importantly, to respond much more quickly to customer needs. So following the trends that are ongoing with consumers. I am going to skip through the next couple of slides. They're around security and the fact that we're able now to, none of these people are real, by the way. This is all created by an artificial intelligence program using images that it's found on the internet. I'm going to talk a little bit about AI. I think it's going to power human creativity. You look at, a lot of this tedious back office jobs that people have been doing for many years, whether that's inputting data or whatever. We're going to start seeing that kind of CRM data, that kind of thing, taken over by AI. Legal services, again, lots of documents. There's one startup in the UK now that is using machine learning to work in the Department of Justice to use AI in very complex legal cases, which is far more efficient and far more productive and cheaper than using human lawyers. It allows us to offer, to see the world in new ways. I've already shown you the example maybe of the geo-economic trends we can see from satellites and drones. So our perceptual systems in agriculture, super important. It's going to allow us to optimize our decision making, whether that's issuing loans to first-time borrowers who maybe wouldn't have been offered loans beforehand. We're looking at collaborations between AI companies such as DeepMind and other medical providers, so that we're using them for X-rays, and they're able to read those X-rays with above human levels of accuracy. It's going to help us understand each other a bit more. I think that, I was talking to the CEO of a large utility company, and he was telling me how that they have a whole new tranche of customers who've never defaulted on their bills before, but they're now able to identify that they might be in financial trouble using AI, and they're able to reach out to them proactively to help their customers, which I think is very important in terms of building those relationships. So in summary, this basically is a chart from McKinsey that shows you that the the companies that are investing in technology are becoming more successful, and the companies that are not investing in technology are beginning to struggle further, even more. I think I mentioned earlier on about the important organizations, and I think empathy is going to be really important. This isn't just rhetoric any longer. I think that leaders now are really thinking about this new social contract and human-centric businesses. I think it's going to be super important. And finally, I'm going to just get through this because we're out of time now. I think it's a great saying. This is from Massimo Banzi, who is one of the people behind the Arduino, which is a open source computer. You don't need anyone's permission to make something great. So I think we're all, we're all in the position to make smart choices about the way that we progress, because the purpose of every piece of technology we've ever created over the past few years isn't about, the technology, it's about human need. So I think that we're going to sort of continue, doing what we've been doing for millennia to connect with other human beings in meaningful ways through business or whatever. That's not going to change, because it's really not about the technology, it's about us as human beings. And I will wrap up here and stop sharing my screen. This is the amazing graphic that's been done around this. I should stop. Steve,
yeah.
What's next? Do I stop sharing my screen? How's this going?
No, you can leave it. You can leave it like that for a second. We've got a thank you, Greg, for absolutely fascinating insights. Great contribution to all our customers and partners that are listening. I have a few questions, and we've got literally probably 5 minutes.
Yeah, no problem.
So one of the questions that I actually have is based on what you've said in the last few slides. If you have, young children under the age of 10, what do you feel they should be studying, and what careers will they be coming into in the next 10 to 15 years?
That's a really interesting question, because I think that you can, so obviously STEM skills are incredibly important. So we're seeing, you know, huge steps in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, super important. But I also think that, you know, you need people with empathy and people who are able to make connections. So here's a great example. You've probably all heard about the breakthrough with DeepMind last week or the week before last around protein folding. So if we are able to predict the ways that proteins fold, then we are able to take a very, you know, we have a much deeper understanding, and we can possibly look at ways in which we can help people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and those kinds of diseases. So DeepMind obviously is part of Google. And what DeepMind has the way that they pursue science isn't by, you know, a lot of labs these days, they throw, you know, physicists in a lab and they say, right, off you go, we'll see you in 5 years, come up with something. What DeepMind does is it actually puts an interdisciplinary team in a lab. So you might have a biologist with a computer science major, with a philosophy graduate, with someone with expertise in psychology. So people who have got very different skill sets, and then they ask them to solve a particular problem. So I don't think there's any sort of like one answer to this. Yes, science, technology, engineering, maths are going to be absolutely crucial for many, many careers. But I don't think that it's, you know, that those are going to be the only careers. I think we're going to need people who are able to use emotional intelligence. People are going to be able to communicate, because we're going to have to be able to, you know, it's great that we have potentially vaccines now for COVID-19. But, you know, one of the big parts now we're going to have to achieve is the World Health Organization, through someone called Heidi Larson, is going to, she runs something called the Vaccine Confidence Program. And her job is to ensure that governments have the skills and the communication ability that they need in order to get people to be immunized. So it's about the science, but it's also about communicating and also joining everything up together, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. I've got one last question, which is, how concerned are you about the rise of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I think this is one of those kind of, you know, those questions that people tend to worry about, you know, are things going to go rogue? Are we going to look at sort of like some kind of like Terminator sort of scenario? And I think the way to look at it is, you know, very simply, artificial intelligence, it's a tool, it's a general purpose tool, so we can apply it in many different domains, and that's what's intriguing about it, and that's what makes it so powerful. But like any, you know, technology, let's think back to, I don't know, automotive industry. You have to regulate, right? And there are things that we're going to have to look at so that there isn't an impact on the world in a negative way. So, you know, we have to think about, how do we want to build these algorithms? How do we want them to perform? What kind of governance do we want? You know, and there are all kinds of global governance councils now, and lots of you know, international organizations that are looking like, how do we create standards around this? How do we prevent in-belt bias? How do we ensure that, you know, this kind of technology is used in the right way? So it's a nuanced thing, right? Like anything, there's going to be opportunity. For instance, I showed you those images of images of human beings that have been generated using AI from the internet. So that's clearly not a good use. But equally, you know, we're seeing the way that we can analyze data in new ways and understand new opportunities. So it's nuanced, and we're going to have to, you know, as with any new technology, we're going to have to, as we go about it, we're going to have to regulate it in ways that are for, you know, the good of human beings in the world.
Great. Well, Greg, thank you very much on behalf of everyone. Really fascinating. Very much enjoyed your whole presentation. So thank you again.
Thank you to everyone for watching. I hope it was useful.
It was very useful. And I'll just say to everyone that's now listening, we have a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 3:20 p.m. GMT, or 20 minutes past the hour, which is about 10 minutes from now. So if you can leave the session and then connect again, and the next session will be with Dr. Brett Lane, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.